Right, let's talk about your team. I see the helmet up there. The Cleveland Browns, 0-1, but an admirable effort in Kansas City, and they were up 22-10 at the half without the services of Odell Beckham Jr., already ruled out for Sunday's game against the Houston Texans. Now, last week they took it right up until game day. There was a thought that maybe OBJ would play. He suffered the torn ACL last year, Week 5, against the Cincinnati Bengals, trying to make a tackle after an interception.
Week 7, actually.
I don't know how to feel. What was that? Week 7?
It's Week 7,
5, 6,
yes.
7. They know who we mean. I'm going to defer. I'm not going to defer to a Browns fan on that. I'm going to go check it. No, I'll defer to you on that. Week 7, I stand corrected. I sit corrected. How concerned are you as a Browns fan, Myles, that they've already scratched OBJ on Wednesday? So we're not going to have the limited participation in practice and, take it up until Sunday. Now, maybe they're thinking it's the Texans. We don't need to play any games. But I worry when guy was so close, apparently, to playing last week, and now it's just he's out. It makes me think that there may have been an aggravation or something to change the circumstances from last week to this week.
Oh, yeah. I think that it's fair to say, there must have been some sort of setback. But Kevin Stefanski said today that there has not been any kind of setback. So, I don't know. I guess we got to take Kevin Stefanski at his word, even though we know very, very well that coaches lie all the time in press conferences. But if there hasn't been any sort of setback, then it just means that, you don't really know where Odell Beckham Jr. is in terms of his recovery. And it's interesting, too, because I think during the summer, you had guys like Baker Mayfield talking about, oh, my gosh, you're just going to be unbelievable. It's going to be unbelievable once you see Odell Beckham Jr. come back again, And even Odell Beckham Jr. said at his youth football camp, right before training camp started, he's feeling really good and all these different things. Now, we haven't actually heard from Odell Beckham Jr. since training camp started. They haven't put him in front of the media at all. So it's hard to really know exactly where he is from his own mouth, since he hasn't been able to really say anything, and he hasn't necessarily put anything direct on social media either, other than the fact that he just seems to really want to play. But if he's not there yet, then you don't want to put him out there too early, because then that could set him back for the rest of the season. If you're going to play him, you want him to be able to play for the entire year. But at this point, I think it's fair to be a little bit concerned as to where he is, because you just don't know where he is. And if he's not out there on the field, then that's another weapon that the Browns don't have to be a really, really good and productive offense.
And, Myles, if there was no setback, but they've decided to rule him out 4 days before the game, then something else has happened. There's got to be a logical explanation for it, because you'd be getting the guy ready. He's not on the physically unable to perform list. He's good to go. He's ready to go. So what's happening here? Look, I have had a belief throughout the offseason that he's a trade candidate at some point. And maybe there is that floating around in the subtext of all of this. They've got until the Tuesday after Week 8. November 2 is when the window closes. If they feel like they're getting it done offensively without Odell Beckham Jr., maybe they decide to get what they can when a team emerges as a suitor for OBJ and just move on. Almost like a Deshaun Watson situation, but not publicized. Nobody knows that that's what the Browns are thinking about doing, if there's anything to this. But when something unusual happens, it invites us to wonder what's going on. And it's unusual for a guy to have practiced all week, on the verge of playing in Kansas City, and now he's out on Wednesday, and the coach says there hasn't been a setback. It invites us to say, what's up here? And it wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility for what to be up is the possibility of Odell to be out, because, Myles, they don't need him. They don't need him.
Okay, yes, they do. Anybody that has the talent of an Odell Beckham Jr. on your roster, you need that player. It doesn't matter, what you might have around you. Now, I will say this, that the Browns' offense is not predicated on their passing game, right? And obviously, they made it to the playoffs last year without Odell Beckham Jr. being healthy. They won a playoff game without Odell Beckham Jr. being healthy. It's not like we're talking about Nick Chubb.
So much for them needing him.
Well, okay, but why can't I
Checkmate.
just finish my point here? That's not checkmate. Jesus, man. Like, I haven't been on this
Self-checkmate.
shit in months.
Self-checkmate. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
Just have fun.
Okay, yeah. But my point here is that if you can have another vertical threat and a vertical threat that's been a Pro Bowler in this league, that's something that they were missing last year when they played Kansas City in the playoffs. It's something that honestly they were missing on Sunday when they played Kansas City. And you had a gotta have it situation. You want a gotta have it receiver, and that's something that they didn't have necessarily on the field. So I think that they do need him. It would be really nice to have him at the very, very least. But I don't know that we could just say like, oh, well, because they won a playoff game, they don't need this guy anymore. I know that that's what you like to do, Mike. You know, when I'm doing this, I'm stirring the pot for you because that's all you're doing. But I just don't think that that's – I see what you're saying, but I don't agree with it. How about that?
By the way, it was week 7. I will stipulate
I know
that
it was
now
week
that I'm
7.
looking at the schedule.
How many times have I written
try
about
to change
this
the
over the
subject.
offseason? I know it was week 7. That's why I could correct you.
Here's the reality, and we don't know the answer to this question because the Browns have no reason to be honest or candid with us about it. It would be useful to have a talent like Odell Beckham Jr. on your offense. I don't dispute that. What they don't need is the OBJ who was wired like OBJ of old, the Randy Moss attitude, the I must have the ball, I'm always open, and if you want to win the game, throw it to me. And if we don't win a game and you haven't thrown it to me, ipso facto, we lost the game because you didn't throw it to me. That dragged them down in 2019. I think that was a very underrated distraction to Baker Mayfield and contributed to his regression. He's holding on to the ball too long because we got to get the ball to OBJ. We got to get the ball to OBJ because we're going to hear about it all week if we don't get the ball to OBJ. It becomes this narrative that takes over the situation. Last year, and that's why it came up after he got injured. Hey, maybe the offense will be better off without him, and they got a little pissy about that, and then the offense was better without him. It's not just removing his talent. It's removing everything that goes along with having a talent who is genuinely convinced, and not in a malicious way, that the path to victory goes through getting me the football as often as possible. And if they have not been able from week 7 of last year to week 1.5 of this year to get him to deprogram that aspect of his being and accept the fact that he's just a piece of a machine, that's why I'm saying maybe there is an unadvertised Deshaun Watson truce going on here where quietly, discreetly, inevitably, he gets traded to your Los Angeles Rams at some point between now and November 2. Trade him for Deshaun Jackson and Tutu Atwell. Both OBJ for that, and then you got 2 guys who can stretch the field in Cleveland.
Okay, yeah, maybe so. But I just feel like the one thing that I think you're discounting from 2019, actually it's a couple things. But the first thing is the fact that they have Kevin Stefanski as head coach now, and they don't have Freddie Kitchens, who I think we can all say looked pretty darn unprepared to be a head coach. Well, you just said it, in a more blunt way than I just did. But you're right. It was. And he was not prepared to be a head coach. He had no business probably being the head coach of the Cleveland Browns that year. And I think from a maturity aspect, from just looking, sounding, acting like an adult, right? Establishing a program, Kevin Stefanski is leaps and bounds where Freddie Kitchens was in 2019. So I think from that standpoint, now you have Baker Mayfield, who is more entrenched in this system, more comfortable in this system, understands it. He's been playing in it for over a year. And that, too, is part of why things started getting better in week 7 on. We'll never know how well Odell Beckham Jr. would have fit within that offensive system as they all got more comfortable as the season went on. But when you're thinking about it, there were no OTAs, right? There's no off-season program. Everything was virtual. They didn't have preseason games. They didn't have a real training camp either. So the first time you're really, truly running this offense is week 1 last year. All right, against the Baltimore Ravens. That didn't go very well for the Cleveland Browns. Never seems to go very well in week 1 for the Cleveland Browns, at least since I've been, football conscious. So now you have an entirely different situation here, and we'll see what this thing looks like if and when Odell Beckham Jr. comes back. But I just don't feel like you're going to have that situation there in 2019 because Baker Mayfield is more mature, and I think that also Kevin Stefanski as a head coach is running a much, much, much different program than Freddie Kitchen was a couple years ago.
Bottom line, if there wasn't an aggravation and he's already ruled out for Sunday's game, there's something strange happening.
It's a thing that makes you
normal.
Go, for sure.
It's not normal.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.